Hello, and welcome to another episode of Disrupt Your Now. And for those of y'all who are not familiar with this show, it's all about understanding that someday never comes. So you need to go after your dreams now, even if it's just a little step at a time. Tonight, I have my good friend Larry Jorgensen, who has created a whole new career for himself. He's been a journalist his entire life, but now he's also a book author. And he was on my show a year or so ago to talk about the Coca-Cola Trail. And tonight I have him on to talk about Shipwrecked and Rescued. This is one of my favorite tales of shipwreck. It's an amazing story, and I couldn't believe it when Larry wrote the book telling the whole story. Welcome to the show, Larry, and I'm so excited for you to share this crossroads of history, real people, and business.
Lisa, I really appreciate the opportunity because I love talking about the story. You talk about shipwrecks, especially Lake Superior. Everybody says, "Oh, the Edmund Fitzgerald."
Yeah.
Well, our story ultimately has a happy ending. It took a
I
while to
know.
get there, but unlike the Edmund Fitzgerald, um,
Yeah.
so that makes it good. It shows that perseverance does have a positive result if you just stay at it.
It does, and it has a happy ending, but it took so much teamwork, ingenuity, creative thinking, and the never give up. If you couldn't
Right.
figure out one way, back it up and go after it another way. So I want you to
Absolutely.
tell the listeners a little bit about yourself first, and then we're going to get into this whole story.
Well, I guess my background or who I am can be described very simply. I'm what they call an old news dog. Uh, when I was even in high school, I had the opportunity to work, part time during school days and full time during the summer at a weekly newspaper. I sort
Oh,
of got addicted. That goes all the way back to the days of hot lead and linotypes. So from there, that was a weekly. While I was in college, I worked for it was a publishing company that did a newspaper a day, so almost like a daily. Uh,
yeah.
from there, I got into radio. Um, went south. That was in Milwaukee when I was in newspaper. Went
Okay.
south to Texas in radio, then into Louisiana into radio, and then I got into TV in Shreveport, Louisiana. Loved it. Um, and then I just, I'm a northern Wisconsin boy. I got the urge to kind of head home, and was fortunate enough applied for an open position in Green Bay, Wisconsin, at Green Bay TV, got the job. It was during the Vince Lombardi years.
Oh,
What a
wow.
what a time to be in Green Bay. But also, I fell in love with the Upper Peninsula because of that job. Um, there was a major copper strike going on in the Upper Peninsula. It ultimately ended not well. They closed down the copper mines. There was also the last run of the passenger train that went to the tip of the Keweenaw Peninsula. I had an opportunity to ride that last run.
Oh, wow.
What a wonderful feature. I wish I wish I'd have made off with the film. But anyhow,
I
so I
know,
mean,
wow.
it,
That
it,
sounds
it,
amazing.
it's always sort of things have always tied together.
Mhm.
Um, because I fell in love with the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We were up there vacationing 3 summers ago, and I happened to see a little bitty article in a publication, a little tourist publication, that gee, at one time Copper Harbor had this shipwreck, and I looked at all the shipwreck maps and everything. It wasn't on there. Nobody even knew about it practically. I mean, a
Uh-huh.
few local people, but they didn't make a big deal about it. When I heard the story, that I started researching, it is truly the only shipwreck and rescue of its kind of the 6,000 plus Great Lakes shipwrecks ever. Just because of the fantastic rescue and how it all happened. Again, that perseverance, you know, um, it's amazing how it happened. And that I just thought as I looked into it, I've got to gather this all together. Well, to show you how it wasn't a secret, but it just wasn't talked about that much.
Uh-huh.
I went to the first place besides local folks. I went to the archives at Michigan Tech University. Now that's in Houghton. That's about 40 miles away from where the shipwrecked. And
Mhm.
I went to the archives. The first person I talked to in the archives, when I told her what I was looking for, she said, "I've never heard of that."
Oh, wow.
She's in the archives. She finally found someone else in the archives and, "Oh yeah, we've heard about that. That was an interesting shipwreck." So they started digging and they found some things for me, you know.
That's
But
so amazing. I'm not even sure where I ever heard of it first because I had heard of it, but I didn't know all the details. And I'm sitting here going, how would I have heard of it? And it makes me wonder, possibly through the Garrett family, the race car driver that's my client, his family is all from Michigan, the Upper Peninsula. So it could have been because of that, but it also could have been just because I read so much and I'm a history and mystery buff. But I want to back up for a second. You were talking about what a huge achievement this is, and I want the listeners to put it in perspective of modern day shipwrecks. Everything is lost. And,
right,
to think this is all the way back in the 20s and up in an area that is covered with ice and snow and so remote, roads not going in, and they were able to salvage almost all of the cars and none of the crew died, right?
right. In fact, the first rescue was the crew. And again, you talk about preparedness. Some of these guys were from Detroit. You know, they almost thought they were going on a cruise, I guess, because
Yeah,
some of them for footwear they had loafers. Some of the
that's
crew,
amazing.
and they certainly weren't prepared for the challenge they were going to meet.
Yeah.
They were able to get off of the ship. It had crashed on a reef, so it didn't
Yeah,
sink.
let's back up and tell them the beginning of the story and the cars and and it that being a new product, so that the shipping company isn't used to moving those products. So let's go through that part so they understand kind of the backdrop of the wreck.
Yeah, 1926. The Chrysler was really starting to come on. Walter Chrysler had started the company, and 1926, 1927, those were truly growth years for Chrysler. And and it was for Detroit in general. A lot of automobiles were catching on, and they were becoming affordable. So then the mission is, how do you transport them to auto dealers? We
Uh-huh.
didn't have these wonderful highways with big trucks, so the Great Lakes became a wonderful way to do it. A company called Nicholson, which we write about in the book,
Uh-huh.
became one of the major ship carriers of automobiles. Started out with one, kept adding to the fleet as more cars were evolved. And by the time our story occurs, they had 12 large ships that were hauling automobiles to ports along the Great Lakes.
Uh-huh.
Um, the interesting thing is the ships weren't designed to haul cars. The one that we talk about, the City of Bangor, was designed primarily to haul iron ore from Minnesota, from the ore mines in Minnesota, down to the steel mills on the lower lakes to make steel for cars and so forth.
Uh-huh.
So consequently, a load of steel and a load of cars, there's two different weights here. We've got
Yeah.
a heavy ship when it's loaded with iron ore. Uh, that really wasn't considered when they loaded the cars.
So I
Nobody.
want people out there, people who are not familiar with the marine industry, and I used to be in the marine industry, so I know how important that is. When you don't have a heavy load, your boat is higher up in the water, so it's more top heavy. Not only are you more likely to strike a bridge or something, but in this case, since you're top heavy, you're going to go back and forth more.
Yeah, you get kicked around. He got into very serious storm. November, is a famous month for shipwrecks on the Great Lakes.
Uh-huh.
The Edmund Fitzgerald went down in November. So
Yeah.
that's a bad month to be out there anyhow. And the storm was so bad that it actually started tossing the ship sideways, just rocking the ship. And ultimately the ship was light enough that it literally tossed it high on this reef. And
Wow.
in the process of doing it, of course, there was a big gash in the ship, and it took on water. So I mean, it was trashed immediately. And
Mhm.
here it's these the crewmen that thought, well, we're going on another boat ride to Duluth. Now they're on a reef off of the most isolated area you could be in Michigan, and they're not prepared for it. And no one knows they're there. There's no communications in those days. No one knows the ship has crashed. You know,
Wow.
so they're on the reef. What do? They get the lifeboat. They get it ashore. A couple guys get it ashore. They push it out. Have a rope. Bring more people. Finally, they get all the crew on shore. Leave the ship.
Just that part is amazing. Just
It
that.
is. And then to compound their problems, you talk about you know a lot to deal with. They thought that they were west of the little town of Copper Harbor because there's a mountain called Brockway there, and the captain thought he had seen the mountain, so he must be west of Copper Harbor. They weren't. They
Ah,
were east of Copper Harbor. So when the crew gets off, they think they're west. They think, well, if we walk east, maybe we can get to Copper Harbor before we all die out here.
uh-huh.
When they start walking east, they're going the wrong way. They're
Oh,
already, So you've got that. They finally realize it. They turn around and they start heading back. Now, some of these guys, they're not prepared for this, and the snow is 4 feet deep and worse.
see, I
Um,
can't even imagine that. Even if you're prepared, I cannot imagine walking through 4 foot deep snow.
Well, that area is known for heavy snow in the winter. This
Yeah.
past winter, they had 300 and some inches of snow. The Keweenaw Peninsula, certain areas were ranked by the U.S. Weather Service as the most snow covered in the country. So
Wow.
we would expect that up there every winter. So, and some of them, to get protection, they took some blankets off of the ship, they tore them up and wrapped their legs with these blanket shreds,
Uh-huh.
thinking that would give them protection. Well, ultimately, as they wandered through the snow, lost and freezing, the snow was building up behind the blankets, and the blanket was actually keeping the snow, and it would melt because of body heat into ice.
Oh my
So it was
gosh.
packed around them. It made it worse, not better.
Wow.
So they wandered for 2 days before a Coast Guard ship luckily stumbled upon them and was able to bring them to the little town of Copper Harbor.
Golly. Just that part of it is just mind blowing. And then people open their homes, right? Because this was a tiny little town. People open their homes and let the crew members stay with them, right?
Yeah, it's a very tiny town. The reason the Coast Guard had found them, they had previously gone out to rescue crews from another ship and
Okay.
didn't even know about the Bangor. And first went by it in the storm. They didn't see it.
Uh,
Ultimately, they found the crew. So now you've got the crews from two ships in this town of Copper Harbor,
uh,
probably population 36 at that time. Yeah, I don't know, not many, that's for sure.
yeah.
3,000. And there was one little boarding facility there, very tiny, that took in some of the crew from the first ship. But what about the second crew? They're really in bad shape.
Yeah.
Um, One of the homes, it was the Berg family, and again, we're snowed in. We're at the end of the peninsula. Their father had fortunately slaughtered two hogs for winter, so they had pork.
Oh,
They
wow.
had they had quote a well producing cow and some chickens, and they said we'll take them in. they were able to get the crew to that house. And it was a mission just to get them from the docks of Copper Harbor to that home, which was less than a half mile away, because they were in bad shape. They were falling down. A lot of them didn't think they were going to make it.
Yeah,
They
weak,
did.
frostbitten. And look, y'all, for those of us who whine because we're not able to get the brands or whatever the food that we want, think about this. That family had their food for the winter to help them survive the winter, and they're sharing it with these people that they didn't know, who literally would have died if it weren't for them, because they have frostbite and everything else.
Well, and they didn't know when, if ever, during the winter, the supply of food would be replenished.
True, yeah.
But they knew what they needed to do, and they took care of the crew. Some of them were really badly injured from the frostbite, and there was the Coast Guard was station, which was further east or further west. I'm sorry, of Copper Harbor. When he took some of the first crew to the Coast Guard station. When he got back there, he was able to make communications with a doctor in Calumet. That's about 40 miles away. He said, "We really need help up here. We got some of these crewmen are in bad shape." There was a gentleman in the little town of Calumet who was an auto dealer who had been experimenting with putting tracks on the tires and skis on the front, and he volunteered. He said, "Let's go get them," So he went out, and they brought the most serious ones to the hospital in this homemade snowmobile, if you want to call it.
That is so cool, though. That's so cool that somebody is like, "Oh, this thing's got to work," and it just so happens that they're able to save people's lives because they've been fiddling with it.
Right. And, ultimately, all of the crew the remaining crew was transported by sleigh. They all ended up in the hospital. Yeah. Some of them stayed there for several months, but as they were released, they would go back to able to get back to their hometowns. But there were several that stayed there for a long time. And the story in town, I was never able to verify this, but it makes sense that several of the crewmen really thought they had some real nice nurses and decided that they would stay in Calumet, okay? And they settled down there. I wish I could have found at least relatives of, descendants of one or two of them. Would have been a good story.
It does make sense, though, that, that as long as they were there and they get to know people, and then you're kind of like, "I'm here, I might as well stay."
So anyway, we finally get the crew saved, but now we've got an abandoned, badly damaged ship sitting high on a reef off of Copper Harbor, off of the Upper Peninsula. Yeah. So Walter Chrysler, he actually went out and saw it.
Oh, wow.
Him and the insurance adjuster went out there and said, "Yeah, it's a loss." Mm-hmm. Well, Walter said, "But my cars are on there. I want my cars back." So he hired a salvage company out of Duluth and offered to pay them, I think it was $150, $160 per car that they could return to Detroit. So they concoct this idea, wait until the ice freezes around the reef. So they wait now the wreck is in November. Uh-huh. They wait until January when the ice is finally formed solid enough around the reef that they could get the cars off of the boat, onto the reef, and ultimately onto the shoreline, okay, driving them over the ice. They had a plan. They thought, well, we get them to shore, we're going to build a road like about 7-8 miles from the crash site to the little town of Copper Harbor. Mm-hmm. Well, that plan lasted about a mile. And they thought, no, this isn't going to work. Again, we're dealing with trying to build a road in 4-foot high or more snow, and drifted snow that is even higher. Yeah. But somebody said, wait a minute. The ice is frozen along the shore. let's drive along Lake Superior shoreline, and ultimately we'll get them to town that way. In the book, I think one of my most favorite photos is a photo of the cars on the shore, and in the background is the lighthouse, the Copper Harbor Lighthouse.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to try to find it real quick while you're talking because
So
I love that.
they get them. They start
Yeah.
one by one, getting them. Yeah, there it is.
Y'all can see it. Isn't that amazing? That is
There's
so cool.
the Copper Harbor Lighthouse. If you get up to Copper Harbor, it's still there, and you can go see it.
And
But
check
it's
out these people in the snow. Look how deep it is.
you
Oh my
they're gonna
gosh.
they're shoveling. That's going on the deck of the boat. Now that boat has sat there for 3 months, and it hasn't quit snowing. So the cars that were on top on the upper deck are completely encased in snow. I mean, some of them all you can see is maybe a little headlight or something sticking out. So they had to get those shoveled out, axed out a lot of times because their ice had built around them.
Right,
So
because
they
the spray from the water
right.
is freezing.
So then at least you've got access to this crude elevator that brings up the rest of the cars from the bottom of the ship.
Uh-huh.
There were 13 cars lost, by the way.
Yeah.
When the ship got into the rolling of the seas, so to speak, there was a chain that was used to chain one line of them on the deck altogether.
Yeah.
Well, that was a mistake. Again, learned by your lessons. That chain broke, and all 13 cars that were tied to that chain went overboard. Somewhere in the bottom of Lake Superior, there are 13 1927 Chryslers. Okay. So anyhow, they get the cars one by one. They get them off the boat. They get them onto the reef and then onto the shore. Now, the challenge to get them to Copper Harbor isn't as simple as let's just drive them there. Some of them have batteries, some of them don't. Some of them that have batteries have dead batteries.
Yeah, as long as they've been sitting there. Yeah.
The ones that they can get running right away, they get them to Copper Harbor, and then they have to relay the batteries back and forth for the other cars. So it was just a project to finally get all the cars, which was 200 and 20, 30 some, to Copper Harbor. And another picture, which is even on the back of the book, is one of my favorite. Here's the town of village,
This is
whatever.
crazy. Look at all those cars. It's crazy.
Maybe you got 3 dozen people living there, and you
Yeah.
got 200 and some brand new cars, and there they sit. Because remember, we don't plow the roads in the wintertime. There's only one road anyhow. So it's now what? We got 200 and some new cars. How are we going to get them to Detroit? That's the next mission. So they say if we can get the cars to Calumet, and that's where the hospital was. Calumet Lorium, it's Twin Cities.
Okay.
If we can get the cars there, there's a depot. We get them on a train, and Walter can get his cars back. Okay. So how are we going to get them to Calumet? There are 2 counties involved in that Upper Peninsula. The 2 county highway crews jump into action. Nobody said, "Well, what are you going to do? We're going to pay us some money here." They just
Yeah. We
was a challenge. Let's get the road open, and they worked for almost 3 weeks to get that one little winding road of 30 some miles open. It got so bad when they got close to Copper Harbor, the snowplows that they had couldn't handle it. They were fortunate, again, ingenuity, keep working. They found a new type of snowplow, one of these rotary, blow the snow type that was just being developed over in Albert Lee, Minnesota. And they were able to talk whoever into bringing that over to finish the last 6 miles of the road to Copper Harbor because there was just too much snow. The people that have remember, children had told the story of when that monumental snow machine with the blowers came down the hill into Copper Harbor. The noise was, what is that noise? It was amazing, But they finally got the road opened after almost 3 weeks. So now we have 200 and some Chryslers sitting there. In the meantime, they've been hauling gasoline by sleigh, tanks on sleigh, to Copper Harbor. Because now the cars are going to have to make a 40-mile run down a newly plowed road. They better have some gasoline. The salvage company says we will pay $5 a car for anybody who will drive the car from Copper Harbor to Calumet. Well, that day it said that there were a lot of high school kids that didn't go to school that day. An opportunity to make $5. And there were a lot of others. I talked to descendants of people who drove the car, oh, my granddad drove that. And I've talked to people, that have told me some interesting stories. And if you think about it, if you're getting paid $5 and you're driving a brand new Chrysler.
Yeah. Most people would pay to be able to drive the car. And that was a lot of money then.
40 miles. Well, as you get closer to Calumet, there's some side roads. And, of course, urban stories, get better as they're told. But I've heard several people tell me they didn't all make it to Calumet, and we found one car, we write about it in the book, that actually stayed in Calumet and is still there, is still in the Keweenaw Peninsula. So anyhow, they finally get them. Ultimately, they get most of them to Calumet, and they get them loaded on a freight train, and they finally send them back to Detroit. But there's one car, and we did a lot of research on this one. There was two brothers, and ironically, they had both worked on the highway commission that cleared the road. Well, the one brother bought one of the cars. The dealer told him this Chrysler was on the Bangor, and he bought it. Well, he died in about 2 years, and his brother bought it from his widow. And that car stayed in that family for over 60 years, being handed down. Finally, the last member of the family to get the car just really had no interest in it. Ended up, he moved anyhow to Wisconsin, couldn't take it with him. It went into storage, and finally it was sold to someone that thought, I'll restore the car and I'll make a lot of money. Well, that was a bigger project than he thought, and he didn't have the money. And after 5 years, he put it up for sale. So the Historical Association in that Keweenaw Peninsula is very active. They've got 6 museums that they maintain for different causes. One of them is the Lighthouse Museum at Eagle Harbor, which is about 30 miles, 20 miles east of Copper Harbor. And the gentleman there, who is sort of the maritime historian, had fallen in love with the story of the Bangor. And when he found that car was available, they went on a massive fundraising project and got enough money to buy it. And it sits today at the museum at the Eagle Harbor Lighthouse in Eagle Harbor, Michigan. It's only about 30 miles from where it first came ashore. And he'll show you, I've got a picture in the book. The maritime historian there shows the car, and he's pointing to an axe mark that's on the car. That's where the ice was chopped away to help get that car off of the boat.
I'm looking to see if I can find it in the book. I remember seeing it, but here we go. I don't know if you can see it.
I think it's page 50 something or other anyhow.
Yeah,
but it's there, and
I don't think they can see it.
There it is. You got it.
Yeah, I got the page, but I'm not sure where on the car. Sorry, y'all.
I'm not
sure where on the car it is. But that's living history. I see. It's here. It's that
Right, it's on
mark
there, right
there.
there, you got it.
Yeah.
And there he is, he's pointing to the axe mark. When we finally published the book, we released it at that site. We had a a little event, and people came in, and we that's where we officially released the book. Was right there, right in front of the car. We had a table set up, and a lot of people came on. It was fun, and we heard stories. People would come out. Oh yeah, my grandfather, and we heard some stories. So yeah, that was a fun experience just to get up there again and to be with that car.
That is so cool. And like y'all found this Christmas card that the
Oh,
first
that
mate sent to the family he stayed with. Look, y'all, look at that beautiful handwriting. And now our kids don't even learn how to write cursive anymore.
that
And my own handwriting is chicken scratch. I can't hardly read it.
I've resorted to printing because you know what? When you're a journalist and you don't have all the modern stuff, back in the
Yeah,
old days, you develop your own style of handwriting.
yeah,
Shorthand, right?
yeah,
No one else can read it but you, and it really messes up your actual abilities to write in script. So
yeah,
I'll try to write something now, and I'm too big a hurry. And I've learned that if I print, people can read what I write.
yeah, yeah,
But, but that Christmas card, that was from the first mate of the Bangor, and when the captain lost control up in the pilot house, he thought there's the rear little pilot house that has controls in it. And
yeah.
he told the first mate, he said, go back there, see if you can do something to control this ship. So the first mate went back there, and to quote, all he could do was pray. He had no control. So he was one of the ones, obviously, that the Berg family saved.
Mhm.
And his granddaughter met me. They have a little summer. She lives in Indiana, but she met me twice up at Copper Harbor. And the second time she came up, she said, I went through Grandma's memorabilia and I found this card, this Christmas card. That's what's in the book. It's the first mate sending a real nice message and Christmas greetings and thanking that family for saving him and his crew. You
Yeah.
know, what, and another sidebar, that family was awesome. After all this was over, Mr. Berg ran for sheriff a couple of years later. And he was elected. Everybody loved him. He was elected. Well, the county seat was in Eagle River, Michigan, a little bit further west than Eagle Harbor. So they had to move there. And Mrs. Berg, Ida, was known for her cooking. So she sort of became the deputy sheriff, as it were. Okay, her job was to take care of the jail primarily, and it was said, and again, the granddaughter told me this story, that if someone was brought up for some crime, brought up before the judge, and was given the choice of paying a fine or going to jail, he would usually select going to jail, especially in the winter, because it was warm, and Ida was a heck of a good cook.
Oh,
Again, that story that expands. Mr. Berg was elected sheriff the second time, and he was to take office in January. Well, in December, bad storm. Here we go again. Northern Peninsula storms. A car was having trouble, was stuck. He'd gone out to help this car. He got pneumonia.
uh,
He died just a few days into his term in January. So his widow, Ida Berg, was appointed sheriff. Well, she did such a good job that she ran for reelection, and she was reelected sheriff 2 more times.
I love it. And that was, back then women didn't do stuff like that typically.
Well, there is in Michigan, there is a book, and they update it, famous women in Michigan history, and Ida Berg is in there, proud as could be. She
There
was,
you go, Ida.
she was the sheriff, and a good one.
Yes. Yeah, and she was the sheriff longer than her husband was.
See, I mean, you see how all the pieces to the story were brought together because of that shipwreck.
Yeah.
All these things that people did throughout that peninsula because of that one shipwreck.
Amazing things. And look at this picture, y'all.
Yeah,
Now,
that guy in the front of the picture, that's the insurance adjuster.
yeah,
And
he had to be
he's
going.
getting his first look at the boat and say, there's nothing here to.
I think today, if anybody saw a shipwreck like that, encased in ice and snow, they would be like, there is no way we can salvage these cars. And just the determination and ingenuity back then, I love it. And it's such a great human story, but such a great business story all rolled into one.
Well, and then it takes us to World War II because the ship abandoned, now the cars are gone. The ship stayed on that reef for 17 years. It was too high on the reef. They couldn't get it off. It sort of became a tourist attraction. People would wander out the 7 miles to look at it, and when it was warm in the summertime. And then along comes World War II, and we need steel.
Yeah.
And the salvage company says we can do it. We can, and they did. They went out and they torches and dynamite and whatever, and they were able to basically cut it down to the water line, and the steel was hauled in. Ultimately, went into the war effort. Doesn't stop there, because now we have 2 lumberjacks in the woods cutting down trees, and they see what's going on, and they know there's still a lot of that ship underwater out there, a lot of steel yet to be had. Okay, so they concoct this crazy vehicle with a big winch on the back of it, high wheels and so forth, and they charge out to the site. They can make more money with steel than they can cutting down trees. And they proceed to figure out how to get underwater, to use dynamite, explosives, whatever, to get what's left into pieces enough that they could hook that truck winch on it and drag those out of the water. So again, salvage rescue number 2, and they got a lot of it. But to this day, there are still pieces that, as the water washes away and things, heavy storms, there are pieces that'll still show up. And the museum where the car is actually has some pieces that were found that way at the beach that are sitting there by the car. Also, the captain's logbook is in the museum, and the captain's desk. He apparently was able to salvage the desk off of the ship when they were getting the cars. He gave it to the Berg family because they saved the crew.
That's amazing. They got the desk off too.
And he also donated his jacket, his captain's jacket. So we have the desk and the captain's jacket on permanent loan from the Berg family at the museum at Eagle Harbor.
This whole tale needs to be a documentary, Larry. There are just so many interesting little tendrils throughout the whole thing, and it keeps rolling one thing into another.
Well, Lisa, I've done a few books. I've never had a book like this one where what you just said, where people have come up to me and said, that needs to be a video. It needs to be on a History Channel or something, I'd be glad to help, but my ability in video died when I left TV about 1970.
Well, we need to find a producer out there that wants to do this, and then you can be, then you'll be the expert advisor or whatever, you and the people at the museum and the people in the town and everything.
Well,
It's just
well, I
a
could,
cool story. I mean, not just, I could see it as a whole series because all of the different tales within the tale. It deserves way more than an hour.
at the back of the book, we talk about how one of the Detroit newspaper reporters, after hearing of the story, was convinced that hauling cars on the Great Lakes was jinxed. And we actually found, and we wrote about it at the end of the book, a sister ship to the one, the Bangor, called the Senator, was hauling Nash cars from Kenosha, where they were made, up Lake Michigan. When it collided, what else? A big, heavy ore boat. When the ore boat did the number on the Senator, that was the name of the ship, and it took just minutes, and that ship, Nash's and all, went to the bottom. Unfortunately, it took 6, the captain and 5 crewmen with it. To this day, those Nashes are on the bottom of Lake Michigan, and people have called it the largest Nash museum in the world.
I'm surprised that now have people found them and they go down and dive it, or are they still?
Yeah, they've gone down and taken photos and all, but it's now in an area that's protected. So you can't bring anything up. And they're doing it on the Great Lakes. They are designating certain shipwreck areas as sanctuaries, protected sanctuaries. You can dive, you can look,
It's historic, but it's also a grave site because of the people who were lost there.
Edmund Fitzgerald is a good example. One of the people that was a resource to me in the book is also a diver, and he has gone down to the Edmund Fitzgerald. And like you say, there are still bodies down there, and the ship, when you look at it, it really proves how it sank. It was broken half. So he was able to go down. But again, two things: if you bring up history, someone gets it. It's no longer for the public. Plus, if you bring up a boat, especially the old wooden boats, the bringing it up and the oxidation then will destroy it. Ultimately, it'll just rot away. So a lot of times when these wood, especially the older wooden boats, are found at the bottom, they're left there to preserve them.
Yeah, they're in pristine condition with the cold, cold water. The first time I ever heard of the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald was, of course, Gordon Lightfoot's song. I always loved, and I still have that album. I love that song. But that back then got me fascinated in shipwrecks, and especially the ones up there in the Great Lakes.
Yeah, and there are so many stories. And the Great Lakes, it was a major thoroughfare, if you want to call it that, in those days. Old Henry Ford, he had his own fleet, and Ford also had a lot of property in Upper Michigan producing. He had timber property. He would go into the ore country to get ore. So his boats were round trip successful. They would deliver cars. They would bring back product to produce more cars. Henry had quite a fleet, and he loved the Upper Peninsula. There are so many stories about him and what he did up there that he truly was a mover in the Upper Peninsula. And again, it's the history of that area. The next time you go to the grocery store and you're going to grill out, and you buy a bag of Kingsford charcoal. Well, that's Kingsford, Michigan, and the Kingsford plant was part of that used wood that came from Henry Ford's sawmills up there, and they were adjacent. In fact, it was in Kingsford, Michigan, and the plants were side by side. So again,
I didn't know that. I have never been to Michigan, but it's one of those states that I've always thought was so beautiful. And I really became fascinated with it when I was in the marine industry back in the early 90s because I used to get this magazine called This Old Boat. And there were so many old boats that had been renovated and restored, and there were so many of them from up in that area,
Yeah.
of the Great Lakes. And I was like, and of course, I grew up in Virginia, lived in Florida, and so I was like, oh my God, it just was so cool and beautiful, beautiful photographs. I have got to go up there sometime. I've been invited to go with the Garretts, but I've just not been able to go.
Well, another thing, and we talk about the car being at the Lighthouse Museum.
Uh-huh.
Lake Superior has more lighthouses than any place in the United States. And there are many, many of them that you can tour. You can go, it only during the season, they'll be open and you can tour them, and they have books on shipwrecks. They have mine, thank you.
Yay!
And it's amazing. Each lighthouse has a story.
Uh-huh.
Why was it built? The one at Copper Harbor. You've got some of them that actually sit on platforms in the middle of a bay, or they're not even actually attached to land.
Uh-huh.
They're there because there was a reason for them to be there.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's so much maritime history on the Great Lakes. It's just, if you're into that, boy, that's the place to spend as much time as you can.
Well, I absolutely love this book, Shipwrecked and Rescued by Larry Jorgensen. And he also wrote The Coca-Cola Trail, which is also fascinating, history and business. It tells the real story of how Coca-Cola got started, not corporate. The corporation is not what built that. It was the mom and pop companies. And I'm not going to give it away. You have to read The Coca-Cola Trail. And that book is awesome too, because it has so many historical photographs that have never been seen before outside of the families. So, Larry, I want you to tell everybody how they can find out more about you, how they can connect with you, and how they can pick up your books.
Well, it is available. If you get up into Michigan, it's available at a lot of lighthouses and museums and some of the bookstores. But an easy way is go to my website. It's simply shipwreckedandrescued.com. And if you want, I'll even write a note in there when we send you the book. It is available on Amazon, but you don't get that personal attention, Amazon.
Oh, that's right. Hey, and if y'all buy it directly from Larry and get it autographed, make him write, I saw you on Disrupt Your Now.
Yep, shipwrecked and rescued, past tense.com.
.com. I highly, highly recommend it. It's a very fast read, but it is so good, so interesting. And even though I've read it, I'm going to go back and read it again. I've read The Coca-Cola Trail 3 times, and I will definitely be reading this again too. And I just love looking at the pictures because the pictures really, really make the story come to life.
Well, Lisa, one of the reasons we have many of those pictures in there is the captain of the Coast Guard life-saving boat was an amateur photographer.
Oh.
So he stuck with the story. In fact, it's said, and it's probably true because it came down through his descendants, that he actually drove the first Chrysler from the ship to Copper Harbor. He stuck with the story and took pictures, and so a lot of those were made available to us. And you'd never see them anywhere else. The family made them available. Some of them are in the museum at Eagle Harbor, and we were just, again, fortunate, just like the granddaughter with the Christmas card and the memories. The same thing with the pictures from the shipwreck. We were very fortunate of who came to our rescue.
Well, I think a bunch of us need to plan trips up there and go to all these lighthouses, go to the museums and learn more about all this fascinating area of the country and the beginning, really the real development of the industrial age in America. It's so exciting. But, and I want to say one more thing before we go, talking about clearing 30 some miles of road of all that snow and ice. We all live in areas where we see departments of transportation taking years to do a project that might be 5 miles long. Can y'all imagine clearing 30 some miles of ice and snow that deep, feet and feet of snow, so that these cars could go through, and getting it done in just several months? That is a tremendous feat. There are just
Well,
so many great stories.
they're working with snowplows. Let's remember this is 1926 snowplows.
Yeah, I
We're not
know.
talking these big things that you see now.
Yeah,
Amazing.
it's crazy. Well, Larry, thank you so much for being on again. I've enjoyed catching up with you so much. And y'all check out Larry's website at shipwreckedandrescued.com, both with ED, right?
Right.
Shipwreckedandrescued.com. You can find out more about Larry. You can reach out, connect with him. You can order directly from him and get his autograph and make him write, "I saw you on Disrupt Your Now." And connect with him on social media, because he has many, many fascinating stories. And anybody out there who is in film or who wants to produce a documentary, this would be an amazing, amazing opportunity. So reach out to me or Larry. If you reach out to me, I'll hook you up with Larry, but you can reach out directly with Larry. And I just think it would be an awesome story. I think people would love it.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate it. It's been fun to talk to you again.
Yeah, it's been a blast. Thank you so much for joining me. See y'all later.